The graphic novel workshop. I'm Doug Jennings. I'm a graphic artist. I work for a small publisher in Schaumburg, and I'm responsible for. I'm the go-to guy they have for any cartooning work, comic work they want me to do. Although they don't particularly publish comics, but sometimes they will need to have different comics in their work, in their products. I also teach part-time at the Kaleidoscope School of Art in Barrington, Illinois, as their cartooning instructor. And so I do have lots of good worksheets I'm going to give you in the workshop part of the program, and I'm going to, now we're going to just talk a little bit about an intro into the workshop here.
The side there? Yeah, that side.
That side. Sorry about that. This way? Okay, thank you. Okay, so this is kind of like a rhetorical question. What is a graphic novel? And I know that it's almost all of you. I'm sure are familiar with graphic novels, and I've been talking with you before class here, and I know that it's basically telling stories with words and pictures, but it's a little more than that. I want to kind of explain something about it from a creator standpoint. The graphic novels are, yes, they are words and pictures, and it's a unique art form where you combine words to a story and pictures in a way that is an integral part of the story. But there's a little bit of a back history I want to give you about this. The evolution of a graphic novel. Now, graphic novels, when you think about it, you trace their origin. The graphic novel started, at least in the United States, as comic strips. In other words, they originally were comic strips, but newspaper publishers would put comic strips in their newspapers in order to get more readers, because comic strips were colorful, they were funny, they were short, they were cute. Does anyone read comic strips anymore? Comic strips like newspaper comics. What comic strips do you like?
Sometimes there's Spider-Man comic strips, and then there's I can't remember the name.
I'm the same way. Yeah, I can't remember a lot of names of the comics, but what's some of you like?
Garfield.
Garfield, yep, the classic Garfield.
Yeah. I can't remember the name, but I know that it's like a boy is talking to his dad about. I know there's one where he's talking about school.
Yeah, again, I'm the same way.
Yeah, I think that's it.
Yeah, it's like a teenager, and he gets in all kinds of scenarios and stuff. What were you going to say? Calvin Hobbes, another classic. I love Calvin Hobbes, and that's there's all kinds of great comic strips. But I don't read comic strips as much. But when I was younger, I did. And comic strips are really fun because they're short. You read them every day, and there's a great art for them. Well, when comic strips came around, and there started being lots and lots of comic strips, people started saying, "Hey, why don't we just put these in a book? Get all the comic strips, put them all in a book, and then sell the book." So you get to sell them twice. When I was a kid, I loved Peanuts, which is Charlie Brown and Snoopy. I love Snoopy. I just wish I had a dog like Snoopy. Anyway, I got a comic book, a thick book that had just reprinted comic strips of Charlie Brown and Snoopy in it. I loved it. Well, then there's something that happened with comic books, and I think I have one here that I brought. Then there's something that happened with comic books that became, and Superman kind of like, the Superman comic book, the Superman character kind of arrived at the same time they started doing this. And they started saying, hey, we don't have to just put comic strips in here. Let's just write a story that just will go in a comic book. It's not a story that's been in a newspaper. It's not a story it's not a comic strip we're pasting from somewhere else. Let's just write a whole new story for a comic book. And so then the comic books, this is an example of a comic book that's like that. This is from a little later than the Superman comic, but this is the Justice League comic from the 1960s. And this is just one comic book. The story was written for the comic book. They had the artists for the comic book. And it was all, it started and it ended in this. It's about 24 pages of comics. So it evolved from the comic strip to its own story format, which is a comic book. And this would come out like once a month, and it'd be a new story every month, and be like, oh man, I can't wait to see what's going to happen next month. Who are they going to battle this time? This time, amazingly enough, it was the battle against the bodiless uniforms, which now I read this, and I'm thinking, oh man, this is such a bad story. But back then, it was pretty neat. So anyway, comic strips, comic books began to, be created so that in it, like comic strips, they came out the same character. They come out in a regular pattern, regular time schedule, but they were bigger. Okay, so then there was another type of evolution. I didn't show this, but it's going to be like a little missing link in there, and that would be they decided to make the comics books continued into the next issue. That was a big deal. Because I used to hate it when I was a kid. I used to hate the comic books. When I'd read a comic like this, because I was used to reading this one, and then I'd get to the end, and something would be there. The hero would be like, strapped to a buzzsaw or something, and it's like, continue next issue. And I'm going, oh, I gotta wait another month.
Cliffhanger.
Right, cliffhanger. Well, they started doing that, and so they started making multiple comic books with the same, like multiple books in a story arc. So you'd have the beginning of the comic book, the beginning of the story here, and then for like 5 issues, it wouldn't end for 5 issues, and they'd start another story arc that'd be about 5 issues long. And I'm thinking, wow, But and then I started getting used to it, and I started liking it. It was fun. But that came to present another problem, because they wanted to make more money off of these, and they wanted to be able to, once they're done. They want to give it new life. So they put them all in a kind of a compilation, and this is an example of a compilation. This is Justice League also. This is a compilation graphic novel. It's a graphic novel. You know it's a graphic novel when it has a spine. It has like a spine on it. But this is a compilation. This is like, believe it or not, this is almost 90 pages, which is thin pages. But this is like 4 or 5 comic books. It's like a comic book story arc for these heroes, but it was actually the compilation of 4 issues. So that's the reason I'm just kind of giving you that idea, just so you'll kind of get a sense of what they were trying to do here. And that's really how the graphic novel was born. Oops. The graphic novel is a compilation. Like, for example, the graphic novel is about like, it could be like 40 to 100 plus pages. And, it could be like, 400, 500 pages. But it's, they're larger than a regular monthly comic, or, obviously the comics here. They can be a compilation of several monthly serial comics that have a unified arc. They could be like that, like this one. There's some of them that are thicker than this, but they can be a compilation of like several, issues of a comic that had been previously monthly, or it could be an adaptation of a story, like a novel, like I have here. If I can find it. Should have got this. Like here's Dracula in a comic book form. This is the novel Dracula, but they made it into a comic book form. So this is a graphic novel, okay? But it could be an original comic, or it could be an original graphic story, just a totally new story, just made for the graphic novel. And so that's really important to know, because that's really what's the funnest. Now this is I don't know if you ever heard of this comic. This is Watchmen, which is a comic. The reason that this is so, you probably are, maybe not interested in the genre, this type of superhero genre and everything, but this comic was really a big mold breaker, because it was a monthly comic for a while, but it was done in such a way that it was exactly made only for the writing and the story. They planned it out, even though it was 12 issues, and it's all revolving around like the watch. It's 12 issues, like 12 hours of the clock, and it was all planned like meticulously. Every page was planned to be a whole, but also a unit, and it was one of the most well-written comics ever produced up to that time, because it was a complicated story. It was a story that had a lot of issues about government, the nature of superheroes. What if superheroes really exist? That would disrupt all kinds of things in people's lives. It was a really clever. They didn't use Batman or Superman or whatever. They made up their own superheroes, and what if they really existed, and what would that do to society? And it was really just had a lot of scope. So that's like an example of creative one. And then there's another one I'll talk to you more about later. And it can be any, a graphic novel can be any genre. It can be fantasy. It can be sci-fi, biographical, or horror comic. This is a graphic novel, which actually it's not a novel. It's more of a graphic story. It's all about news and the way that news influences us. It's like, it looks kind of boring, in some ways, but it's very cleverly done. And she's talking about, it's not like a story about, some character who falls in love or whatever, but it's actually about how news over time has influenced people and the theories that people have about how news, the media, influences us. And it's a really cool book. It's written by a lady who used to, Brooke Gladstone, who's on NPR. But anyway, they decided to make a graphic novel format. That's really, those type of things are kind of cool.
One of my textbooks in college was, in fact, a graphic novel about Marxism.
Yeah.
And that was a required textbook.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, that's you know, that's, it's in a lot of ways, I've read that that the communists were, and people, this being done, this is kind of a tie-in, were one of the first people to use graphic novels in that way, you know, to promote their ideas and propaganda. Okay, now here's some examples. I have, has anyone ever read this book or heard of it?
I've never heard of it.
Look how thick this is. This is like over 400 pages, almost 500 pages. This is a classic. This is a really great graphic novel because it's written just for itself. It's written as a graphic novel. It's called Blankets by Craig Converse. This is the example of different genres. This is like a coming-of-age story, you know, the first love and the change of, you know, developing your own ideas. It's a really great book. But it's wonderfully written and wonderfully illustrated. Just incredible work. It's black and white, but it's beautiful stuff. But it's very deep, and it's very, you know, just, you know, about, you know, getting your own start in life. You know. But anyway, that's a graphic novel example. There's another one, 100 Bullets, is a criminal kind of crime novel. This one, Fables, up here, is a novel that's, let's talk about it a little bit more. Fables is an example that is it's a fantasy genre, but there's a TV show coming up in the next week or so called Once Upon a Time or something like that. Have you seen it advertised? Mm-hmm. It's actually, I'm thinking they took the idea off this novel. It's where the storybook fairy tales characters are kind of brought in. She brings it. She puts a curse on them, so they live in the real world, and they're like. But this is a little bit different. It's a little bit different than Fables. That's kind of like the whole idea, but it's really a fun graphic novel. They have several volumes. And again, this is an example of a graphic novel that came out as a series, but that was then you know, turned into a graphic novel. Now, I just want to mention, you know, the novel, you know, stories like that. Originally, like some of the great classics, like some of Dickens' novels, a lot of Dickens' novels, you know, Great Expectations, they started in serial format. In other words, they started in like magazine. He'd put like chapters in the monthly magazine. So even novels that you have to read about in school started out in that serial format. And that's one of them. Here I talk about Blankets. This is just, again, this is funny because on the cover he says an illustrated novel. He didn't say graphic novel, although it's a graphic novel, because an illustrated novel would be like if you have, you know, the text illustrations interspersed in the book. But it's a great example of a genre that's, you know. Okay, now this is something I want to show you. This is like is an interesting thing because, okay, DC Comics just this year, starting in September, decided to retell all of their main stories, all their main heroes. They decided to call it the reboot, or the new 52. 52 of their main titles, they decided to just start from scratch and just like tell them again. This is like the Occupy Wall Street kind of Superman. He's like the guy he's like fighting against the rich corrupted officials and all this. And you look at Superman's got like a T-shirt and like jeans and boots. This is supposed to be this is from a future graphic novel. And when I say a future graphic novel, is that right now you can only get this in a monthly installment. But as soon as they're done, probably in the next, you know, several months, they're going to compile it into a graphic novel. And it's an example. And this is another reason I wanted to bring this up. Not just because it's a future graphic novel, or, you know, it's part of the format. But look, this is a splash page. This is like a spread page. You open it up and it's like a spread. It's just very, very sophisticated art, and just, you know, kind of realistic. Okay, well, I thought I think I must have missed a slide, but down at the bottom here, you probably can't see it. I wanted to focus. I wonder what the deal is. I thought I missed a slide, but I thought I zoomed in on this part here. this is another thing I'm talking about graphic novels. I'm going to give you this background. Usually a graphic novel, many of the times, you know, like with the blankets, it's written by one guy. This is written by one guy, and it took him a long time to write because it's several hundred pages. Oops, sorry, it's several hundred pages, and it's he's did all the artwork and all the lettering and everything.
How long did it take you to do it?
It probably I think it took him a few years. Anyway. But this one, in this case, you have the writer's name's Grant Morrison. He's a really innovative writer. The artist, the penciler, is another guy. There's a guy who just does pencils, and his name's Rags Morales. And then there's a guy named Rex Bryant who does just the inks. And then there's a guy named Brad Anderson who just does the colors. And then there's another guy named, which I had it blown up before, but Patrick Grosnian, who does the lettering. So the point that I'm making is that a lot of times a graphic novel is a collaboration. And you have one person doing the writing, and one person... Have you ever thought about writing a graphic novel and having somebody else illustrate it? Have you? I mean, people do that all the time. That's how it's mostly done.
That's what Neil Gaiman
Why
does.
does a bunch of people work on the comic books? They only name it after one writer. One person. They don't give the other people credit for it.
Well, they usually do. This is a credit line right there.
They just make the names smaller and smaller.
Well, okay, obviously, okay, if I'm the writer of a comic, the writer has a lot of input. He came up with a story, and everything, and the penciler has the next amount of input because the writer and the penciler work together. But once you get to the inking and the lettering and the coloring, that's important. But the colorist has less control over the story than the author does. That is a very good point, and that's something that people have a lot of, they grapple with a lot in the industry. But the point that the reason they do this is because all these different things, it would take a long time for this story to be written if it weren't for that assembly line process, and that's why they do it. And even in the manga stories, like I brought a manga. This is a manga that I've been getting into. Okay, a person who wrote this. Now this says story by Tsumi Oba, and then it says it's art by another guy, Takeshi, something. I don't know exactly, but the point is that now that's rare because a lot of times you'll have one writer and artist on a book like this. But the thing is, look at this is pretty thick. And
they usually are.
Yeah, they usually are. And then the thing is, it's not color. But when they really break their backs to get this out on time, they have hard schedules and they are like working almost around the clock to do this. And a lot of times they'll have assistants who camp out in the studio to get it done. And so they work really hard to do these. It's not it takes a lot of time. But that's why a lot of...
It's backwards too.
Well, that's their language. They grew up that way. Okay, so let me just keep
They were
going here.
born that way.
Okay, we're gonna get now to the comic creation process. I just want to kind of draw your attention to the point here that the steps to cartooning or to comic story, any comic story, it's pretty much like you have your idea, you have your story, and you kind of route it all out, you hash it all out, you get your idea down, you get your story down, and then you start doing layouts. Layouts are like thumbnail sketches where you kind of plan out kind of like where things are going to go, what kind of, how many frames per page and all that. And you kind of plan that out. And then you start on your pencil stage. And, your pencil art, it's hard to see the little pencil art thing there. It's the head of a character. And then usually the next step after the pencil art is the lettering stage, and then you do your inks. I'm talking about hand-done artwork. Now, when you do it in an assembly line process, they might mix it up a little bit. And also computer artwork is like a really... has revolutionized the industry, so that makes things a lot easier. But that's just the basic idea. But right now, before our workshop, I just want to touch this creation process about the story and idea and story stage. And I notice I have a lot of people like a guy sketching, a guy talking with his friends, and a guy this is a collaborative type of effort. Here he's writing down his script, page 1, panel 1. The character does this and that, he's writing down the script. That's usually how they start. So the comic creation process, usually comics start out as like a script. And if you go online sometime and type comic script, and you can see some samples. Usually it's like, they have their own different, every publisher has their own formats. But it's interesting to see how they write it. They'll usually start, this is how a writer will send this script to an artist, and an artist will illustrate it. And it's really kind of fun to hear his descriptions. And they'll say, like page 1, they'll say something like, we open on the scene where it's snowy, and you see the snow coming down, the city lights, but you see just a corner, and there's a poor person's, begging on the street, and then this, whatever. They just go into all these descriptions, and then the illustrator says, okay, I can draw that, and so they'll kind of go that way. Most comics are a collaboration between a writer and a penciler. That's why I mention that, because a lot of times there's an inker and there's a colorist and all that, but the writer and the penciler are really work closest together, because once the pencils are done, an inker will just mainly try to make the pencils look finished, and will do it. An inker is a gifted artist, and they can really make the artwork look good or bad. But the point is, the main two team is a penciler and writer. Ideally, stories are paced. If you read your comics, you'll notice that stories are paced so that each page ends so that you'll want to turn to the next page. That's kind of how they pace it. They kind of like plan it out so that at the end of the bottom right-hand corner, in the Western reading, in the bottom right-hand corner, something's there that you'll want to turn the page. That's kind of the ideal way to do it. Not all the time, but that's what they aim for. And then scripting includes planning an outline of the story, and it follows that whole classic beginning, middle, end, that 3-act play type of structure. And I just want to talk about a little bit about that, because we're about ready to go into our workshop mode here. The 3-act structure. I just want to mention what the 3-act structure. You guys have all probably noticed this, but I just want to kind of review this. A 3-act structure is you introduce the characters in the first act. In Act 1, introduce the characters. You kind of see the characters. You establish some incident or something that's going to kick off the story. Something's happened to really start the story. That's Act 1. Act 2. Act 2 can be like rising and falling drama, like a chase, a chase scene, or like a challenge and a fail. Like the hero has, or the main character is like faced with some type of problem, and then they fail, or the conflict, and then a response to that conflict. There's always something going on. That's in Act 2, and that can happen. Act 2 can be pretty long. Act can happen over and over for a long time. You want to drag it out. It can be really good, but then it kind of gears toward a goal. A conclusion. It has emotional ups and downs, but you gear it toward eventually to come to a resolution, and then the conclusion wraps up the story and resolves the conflict or some type of thing in a meaningful way, and ideally it would have some emotional impact or some satisfaction that way. Okay, now I'm going to bring up this story again. Now I'm not going to show you a lot of there's a lot of good artwork in here. But it starts off, this is I want to show you an example. He has the same type of storyline. In other words, he has a 3-act play, but the first story kind of establishes the character, and then then he takes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 more chapters in order to keep the story going, to show the conflicts, to show the dilemmas. He's kind of is raised, like in a very restrictive home, and he gets bullied in high school. He meets his girlfriend. Then they have their troubles, and blah 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 blah. It goes on, and then it comes to the end, the very last chapter, and he has footnotes at the end. But the chapter 8 is the conclusion. So he takes a long time to get there, but he gets there, and it's really a great model. I recommend this book. I know you may not be into a non-manga thing, but it's really good. So now's the time for our workshop part. What I want you to do, we're just going to do a warm-up. I do this in my classes where I teach. I do these little warm-ups. This is not like a big thing. I want to do a little warm-up, and that means you're going to each of you take a piece of paper. You can use your I got cardstock. Is that cardstock? Yeah. I have cardstock because it's a little thicker, and you can take a piece of paper, or you can draw it in your sketchbook. But go ahead and take a piece of paper. And I want us to just do a little fun, quick comic, 3-panel comic. And I want you to this is a little stretch in creativity. I want you to use the idea, and I have, I wish this was, you could see this. I don't know if you can see this. But, okay, the first, just remind you, the three-act comic, and this is where we have to work in our workshop here. The 3-act comic is going to start off. Now, okay, let me give you an example, just a visual example. I'm not going to draw it in because it's not a drawing board. Ideally, this would be a dry erase. But, like, say you have, like, this would be a very simple comic. I'm not saying you do this, but I'm making it so simple that hopefully you guys will do something a lot better. You have, like, a guy, and he has a football or a frisbee. Here's his son. He's standing there. That's the beginning. You see the father and his son. The first, you introduce a character. The father throws the ball, or the frisbee. The son runs to get it. That's a little bit of drama. Will he catch it? You know, blah, blah, blah. You know, that's the middle one. This is his example of what I'm saying. That's the middle, is the rising drama, conflict, and action. The intro establishes the characters, and then at the ending, wrap it up. The son catches it! And there he's there. They're all both happy. That's it. Okay, this is a very simple idea. Now, you can come up with anything else. I'm just giving you an example. But try to come up. I'm going to give you about 10 minutes. See if you can come up with some. It can be, you can use stick figures, you can do faces, you can do close-ups, you can do, scenes. Think about it. This one can establish a story, just a brief story. This one can kind of expand on it with some conflict, with some drama. And that one wraps it up. See what we can do in 10 minutes. And again, it's just a warm-up. This is just for fun.